and 4 terms that you're going to hear. So I'm going to give you these right now. I'm going to give you can look at this if you want. You could take a screenshot or take a note of this really quick, but hopefully you guys can see that. Okay. Positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. Okay? So if you need to go back to take a screenshot of that or what have you. We're gonna geek out here. It's gonna get a little complicated, so bear with me. Hunker down, get yourself a cup of coffee, a pen and paper. Okay? So, but what's really, where this gets complicated, a lot of it is just the language and getting wrapped around that language. And you could just really go crazy over it. But I want you guys to understand it just so in case you need to be part of these conversations. Okay? So, the first thing we need to understand is the terms positive and negative. Because you'll notice all those terms, they're starting with either positive or negative. In this scenario, in operant conditioning, positive and negative do not mean good and bad. Positive and negative means add or subtract. So positive means you're adding something, negative means you're removing something, or the dog is avoiding something. So they're achieving something, accessing something, receiving something. That's positive. Or something is being removed, or they're escaping something, or avoiding something is negative. Something is being removed or avoided. Okay? So you can see that right there. Positive equals add, plus sign. Negative equals subtract, a minus sign. Now, then we get reinforcement. The other word is reinforcement and punishment. So we get reinforcement and punishment. So I'll show you here. Now, reinforcement means to strengthen a behavior. Punishment means to weaken a behavior. Right? So, or another way I put here, increase. So reinforcement, you're increasing a behavior via rewards, right? So you're going to use a reward to increase a behavior. Punishment is you're going to weaken a behavior. You're going to decrease that behavior via aversives. Something aversive. Okay? So you could be adding something pleasant, or you could be adding something unpleasant, or you could be removing or withholding something that the dog wants, or you could be withholding something aversive or something uncomfortable that the dog wants to avoid. Okay? Whew, I know. So, but you've got positive and negative, and you've got reinforcement and punishment. So now I want to make this, I tried to make it into a little chart here just to give a visual. Let me fold my paper here. Hold on a second. So we're going to have columns. So if we have a reinforcement column and we have a punishment column, and then over here we have rows. We have this row is positive, right? Something's being added, and we have negative. Something's being removed, subtracted, or avoided. That's where it gets a little complicated too, because it's not just removal. Sometimes it's just the avoidance of it. Okay? So, but that's what we have. So, if you're reinforcement is a column where we're trying to strengthen a behavior, punishment, or we're trying to decrease a behavior. Okay? So, now anyway, that's hopefully that's making sense. So you're either reinforcing or strengthening a behavior, weakening a behavior, and you're doing it by adding something or removing something. So we're gonna change this up a little bit. So I've already over here, rather than using the words positive and negatives, we have the plus sign. So we're adding something to reinforce, or we're adding something to decrease a behavior, right? So now, but what's complicated and confusing about that language is the use of punishment and the use of reinforcement as the language, because punishment isn't really the opposite of reinforcement, is it? Or reinforcement's not really the opposite word of punishment. So since they're using the word punishment, I think they did that on purpose to imply that it's something unpleasant. So it's reinforcement, then let's call that reward. I think for common language, it makes more sense to use the word reward and punishment. Okay? And remember, punishment's also an emotionally charged word. So don't think of it necessarily as anything harsh. It's just a negative consequence. It's something the dog doesn't want. Okay? So if we change our chart here again, you'll see we have a column here of reward and punishment. And then you got reward through addition, punishment through addition, right? Punishment through the removal of something, or a reward by the removal of something, right? Because it sounds crazy, like you're going to think, how could punishment be positive? That's why that language is complicated. So it's not positive as in good punishment. It's punishment through something being added. Something uncomfortable being added is the punishment. So let's take this, let's simplify this again. So you see how I'm kind of simplifying this a little bit as we go? Let's look here. We got our reward column and our punishment column, but now the reward is a cookie, right? We add the cookie, or the punishment is we pop the leash, a leash pop. And then here you'll see, or the negative reward is the removal or the avoidance of a leash pop, no leash pop. And then the punishment over here would also be no cookie. The negative punishment is you don't get the cookie. Okay? So this starts to simplify these are the most simple things that dogs are being trained with all the time, right? So you tell the dog to sit, and they sit, they get a cookie. That's the reward. If you tell them to sit and they don't sit, no cookie. That's the punishment. Right? That technically is punishment. They don't get the cookie. You remove the cookie, you put the cookie back in your pocket, what have you. So cookie, no cookie, right? Or you tell them to sit and they don't sit, and you pull up on the leash, let's say, to put a little pressure on them to pull them into the sit. Leash, that would be leash pressure, not necessarily leash pop, or it could be a little pop. Hey, sit. And then with a sit, that pressure comes off, or if they sit in the first place, they avoid that pressure. So they maintain the comfort of not receiving that leash pressure over here. Okay? So, but what you notice is, you know what, these should have the positive and negative signs over here. My bad. Let me put a positive and a negative there. Okay? So, but you'll notice there's always a reward and a punishment being used. Even positive reinforcement trainers they're still using a positive and a negative, and they're still using a reward and a punishment, because the positive is I add the cookie, the negative is I withdraw the cookie, or I withhold the cookie, right? The reward is the cookie, the punishment is no cookie. So you have cookie, no cookie, right? The more traditional style training is the leash pressure or the leash pop, or no leash pressure, no leash pop. So see how simple that is, right? I pull on the leash, I relax the leash. I give the cookie, I don't give the cookie. I pull on the leash, or if you listen, I don't pull on the leash, right? Or I start to give the cookie, but you don't do what I want. I take the cookie away. That's so now it's getting pretty simple, and it's something that most trainers, if you've been in my classes, we're doing this sort of thing all the time. These things are happening all the time. So really, it just gets wrapped up in this really complicated language and confusing language of the reinforcement and the punishment and the positive and the negative, right? So, but just think of it. You're always adding or removing or adding or withholding something, right? So that's the simplest way to really, I think you can think of it, is the cookie, no cookie, leash pressure, no leash pressure, or whatever. Those might be replaced with something else, but it's something the dog is trying to achieve. They're trying to go for it. That's your positive reinforcement, or the dog is trying to get something. The negative reinforcement is the removal or the avoidance of something that the dog doesn't want to get. Okay? Now, just one last little tip. Just because I hear so many dog trainers talking, and of course I listen to podcasts and things like that, always looking for little tidbits of new information. But I get there's a lot of confusion going on. I hear a lot of people talking about saying that punishment is anything that reduces a behavior. So I even heard a trainer say something about punishment by rewards, because they're like, the dog is barking and you throw scattered treats on the ground when the person comes in, and now the dog is being rewarded for eating food off the ground and not barking at the person. So you've reduced the barking by rewarding the dog for doing something else. But I think that just makes it more confusing trying to say that that's punishment. It's reducing the behavior, but it's because that goes more into the classical conditioning. You're changing the dog's association with the person. So it's not really an operant conditioning thing in some of those situations. So I think the word punishment was used originally on purpose because there is a certain level of discomfort to it, right? So here's the other thing that gets complicated. When you get things wrapped in this operant conditioning language, is then any like little leash pressure, or even if you're just sort of guiding the dog, which could just be explaining to the dog what you want, gets lumped in with with harsh punishments. And it's really not a punishment if it's just happens to be a physical signal, or you're using a little bit of pressure to guide the dog, to explain something to the dog. I think that falls outside of the range of operant conditioning as well, because it's not necessarily a reward, but it's not necessarily a punishment. It's just, you're just guiding. It just happens to be physical. And so sometimes there's a lot of hang-ups over physical handling of the dogs primarily because of this language. So anyway, I think don't get too hung up on the language. When I'm talking to clients, I will rarely talk this way unless it's somebody who's a psychologist or something and can appreciate this kind of language. And then I'm glad I know that kind of language too, so I can have that kind of conversation if I need to. But anyway, I just wanted to go over that. I don't feel like any behavior modification program's complete without sort of discussing that. And I know that could be pretty complicated, so that's why I said you could take screenshots of those notes. You may want to go, if this interests you, go back and watch this again, pause it, really let it sink in, because you can really get messed up with that kind of language. But if you're interested in it, I'm really hoping it made sense with it, and you could go back and listen to it again. And if it doesn't make sense, let me know. Give me a shout and go, dude, you're not making any sense at all. And I'll see if I can straighten it out. Okay? All right. Thank you very much, guys, for that. That's your operant conditioning. Basically, it's just consequences. Okay? Thank you very much. Bye.